All right, Zechariah 4. And I'm just going to read the whole chapter here. It's only 14 verses. Before I do, you need some background to it. This was the time period right after 50,000 Jews or so had been allowed to come back from the Babylonian captivity. Which everybody know what the Babylonian captivity was. Babylonia came and conquered Israel and Judah. Eventually took them all off. So 50,000 Jews or so had been allowed to come back at this point in time. And King Cyrus had given them the decree that they could come back and they could rebuild the temple. Cyrus died and then Darius took over. Am I good?
Yeah, you are now.
Darius became the king, and Darius upheld the same decree that Cyrus had. But the problem was they kind of middled and muddled around and was not really getting a whole lot done. And Zechariah was the son of one of the prophets that had returned to Jerusalem. His father's name was Berechiah, and he'd been on the forefront of prophesying the new temple and stuff. Well, Berechiah died when Zechariah was very young. So now Zechariah steps into the footsteps of being the prophet that's leading the cause of the temple. What's so interesting about the whole book of Zechariah is all of his prophecies, as we've been talking about in this end time series, they are all foreshadows of what's going to happen again in the end. Remember when we talked about Daniel? Daniel foreshadowed the great throne, the white throne judgment. Everything that Yeshua said that happened to the disciples at that point in time was going to happen later. Everything that's been prophesied in the Bible up until the time that we are breathing and talking right now, that's been foretold, is happening. It's either already been fulfilled or it's going to be fulfilled. Zechariah was a major prophet for the coming of the Messiah. All through the book of Zechariah, he foretells the first coming of Yeshua and also the second coming of Yeshua. But what's interesting in here is in chapter 4, this is called the vision of the gold lampstand. Now, we'll go ahead and read chapter 4. Then the angel who talked with me returned and wakened me, as a man is wakened from his sleep. And he asked me, "What do you see?" And I answered, "I see a solid gold lampstand with a bowl at the top and 7 lights on it with 7 channels to the lights. Also there are 2 olive trees by it, one on the right of the bowl and the other on its left." And I asked the angel who talked with me, "What are these, my Lord?" And he answered, "Do you not know what these are?" "No, my Lord," I replied. So he said to me, "This is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel, not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord Almighty. What are you, O mighty mountain? Before Zerubbabel you will become level ground. Then he will bring out the capstone to shouts of God bless it, God bless it. Then the word of the Lord came to me. The hands of Zerubbabel have laid the foundation of this temple. His hands will also complete it. Then you will know that the Lord Almighty has sent me to you. Who despises the day of small things? Men will rejoice when they see the plumb line in the hand of Zerubbabel. These 7 are the eyes of the Lord which reigns throughout the earth." Then I asked the angel, "What are these 2 olive trees on the right and the left of the lampstand?" Again I asked him, "What are these 2 olive branches beside the gold pipes that pour out golden oil?" He replied, "Do you not know what these are?" "No, my Lord," I said. So he said, "These are the 2 who are anointed to serve the Lord of all the earth." So what I said again, this is the vision of the golden lampstand, and it also contains the olive trees. So when I say this, who's the lampstand? Who represents the lampstand? Yeshua. We light these lights at the beginning of each of our services, and we say he is the light of the world. Yeshua's presence as the lampstand, as the menorah in the rebuilt temple in the end is what we're talking about here. This is what we're seeing here. Now, again, like everything else that we've talked about so far in these end time series, this is also talking about the temple that was going to be rebuilt during this time. But when you get into the prophetic language here, this is a foretelling of the menorah, of the final menorah in the final temple, when Yeshua takes his place in the holy place, in the temple. He is the light of the world. We're not going to need any more artificial light at that time. Why is that?
He will be the light.
He will be the light. We're not going to need any more artificial light. We're not going to need the S-U-N because we're going to have the S-O-N. So that's a wonderful thing for all of us believers. I mean, we can look forward to that. We're not going to need any sunscreen. So in these first two verses, we see talk of the lampstand and talk of two olive trees. We've talked about the lampstand is the Messiah. He's the light of the world. When the temple was instituted by God, the lampstand was what was in the holy place that illuminated the surroundings and the Spirit of God so people could see inside the actual temple. That's why they had to have the menorah. It was an inside dwelling. They had to have this big artificial light source. It was filled with olive oil. That's why there was olive trees on either side of it. So we're looking at this and we're seeing the representations of physical things to spiritual things. This foreshadowing of the end times temple has Yeshua coming back and illuminating, standing in the temple in his rightful place. Not only that, but like I said, he's got two olive trees on either side of him. Now back in Revelation 11, we talked about the two witnesses, Elijah and Enoch. Well, here these two olive trees are those witnesses. These are the witnesses to Yeshua. These are the final witnesses to Yeshua. These are the witnesses that God, 2,000 years ago when Yeshua came in, he didn't have to have these two witnesses. But now he's coming back and he's standing in the temple as a light for everybody. And he's got the witnesses here on either side of him. Before he comes back, he's got the witnesses in the street. Again, proclaiming and witnessing to the people. Yeshua's Messiah. Accept him now. Yeshua's Messiah. In the time of the prophecy, right here, real time, the temple was going to be rebuilt. Just a few years after this, the temple actually was rebuilt. Now, it wasn't the big temple. It wasn't the Temple of Solomon. It wasn't a splendorous temple. But they did finally get the temple rebuilt. And then it was added on later by King Herod, right before Jesus' birth. And we talked about in the second week of our series here, they were even still building onto it as the disciples and Yeshua walked through it. Remember, they were all looking around and oohing and awing. They spent all those years adding additions to the temple, only to have it come down in AD 70. Verses 4 through 7, this simply represents the Spirit of God being with the people. He gave them something to do. He gave them a task, rebuild the temple. He showed Zechariah this vision. He also showed him the vision of the temple in the end. This is the Spirit. This was God's Spirit showing them, whatever obstacles come into your path, I'm going to give you the power to overcome those obstacles. Now the final power that overcomes the final obstacle is Yeshua himself coming back and whipping Satan's tail.
Amen.
He's coming back. He's not coming back as the meek little shepherd. He's not coming back with a little slingshot like David had that slowed Goliath. He's coming back as the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings, the Lion of Judah. And he's going to whip tail. And then he's going to step into the temple and be that light that we're talking about here. He's going to be that 12-foot menorah. And then these witnesses that were killed, we didn't get that far in chapter 11, the witnesses that were killed and then revived 3 days later, They will be on either side of him as his olive trees. I'd say Enoch and Elijah, especially when he was alive, was pretty revered. But man, I mean, you've been held for such a time as to be the witness to the second coming of the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. And then you're going to get to be his witnesses on either side of him when he takes his place in the temple. That's pretty good. I don't think anybody else can really hold claim to something even close to that. So, we see in Revelation that witnesses are again going to be a key component in this event. Verses 8 through 13. And these verses, they just complete the telling of the rebuilding of the temple of that time. Again, for both then and in the future, we know there's going to be a rebuilt temple. We see that in both cases it was prophesied that it was going to happen, and it did happen here. And then it's going to happen real soon. And that's why we're talking about it now. It's going to happen really soon. Now, Joshua was the high priest, not the Joshua that we all know. But the high priest at this time's name was Joshua. They talk about him in here a little bit. Zerubbabel is the guy that's mentioned the most. He was the civil leader. And they became the two witnesses for this temple, this physical temple that was rebuilt at this time. They were given the power to be the witnesses for this temple. We know that Enoch and Elijah are going to be the witnesses for the final temple that's going to be rebuilt. All true witnesses must empower the Spirit of God in enacting their duties. And as we talked about here, the Spirit of God was with Zerubbabel and Joshua. And obviously the Spirit of God's with Elijah and Enoch. He brought them out of the earth thousands of years ago. And they're going to be in Israel, in modern day Israel, in front of the rebuilt temple very soon. So what does all this mean? We just kind of quickly went through all this. The golden lampstand with Yeshua being the menorah, being the light of the world. Everything that's happened in the past biblically, as I've already said, will happen again in the future. We read time and time again. Go back to Exodus and the plagues in Exodus. Are they going to happen again? Yeah. Revelation talks about the same plagues being visited upon the earth again. God has a foreshadow of everything in the Old Testament Scriptures, and even some in the New Testament, leading up to the end. It shows us exactly what's going to happen. Over in Zechariah, this same book, it talks about after the end of the war, of the last big war, when Yeshua comes back and kicks everybody's bahonkuses that are with Satan. It talks about us being in the New Jerusalem and celebrating the feast days. So are the feast days pretty important? Well, yeah, we're going to be celebrating them how long? Forever. How long did he say to celebrate them?
Forever.
Yeah, I think God was pretty intense when he said that, and he intended for us to do it. I don't think he's pleased with those that don't. But that's just my personal opinion. God speaks for himself in these pages right here. The last temple is going to be rebuilt. Messiah's witnesses will come and testify to Yeshua being the Messiah and the importance of accepting him. That's that period that we're talking about. I mentioned a few weeks ago. I believe at this time when these witnesses show up in front of the new temple, the rebuilt temple, I believe we're out of here. Because this effort here is to the Jews. They are in ground zero Israel, out on the streets, preaching to who? Jews. I believe the Gentiles have already had their ride at this point in time. And I believe we're out of here. If you're a believer, I believe we're out of here at this point in time. Now this is 3.5 years into it. Then they spend almost 3.5 years preaching to them. Now while they're doing all this, guys, this world is falling apart. I mean, people are dying right and left. We're having wars, we're having droughts, we're having all those plagues of Exodus being revisited on people, disease, famine. people being killed for not doing what the Antichrist wants them to do. This is going to be a bad time. So these witnesses are in Israel. I believe Israel's kind of protected still, even at this time. And he's preaching to Jews. These witnesses are preaching to Jews. And I think we're going to be out of here. And then the Jews that accept Yeshua at that point in time would be just like anybody else that accepts Yeshua. They're going to have that hope. They're going to have that hope that we know, that the world needs to know. The naysayers will try to mock them, harm them, dissuade them, and finally they'll try to kill the witnesses, and they will. And then they'll come back to life in 3 days. The Messiah's return will be right after this, and the witnesses will stand on either side of him as he takes his place once again in the temple as the illuminator of God the Father's presence. So we don't have much time. Now, to anybody that doesn't know the Bible, that wasn't raised in church, this sounds pretty fanciful. This sounds like almost science fiction. I mean, you got people being transported in time. You know, you got a Savior that was killed and raised from the dead in 3 days, and he ascended to heaven in flesh. You got these guys that was transported in time and space, you know, from 3,000-4,000 years ago, and now they are in Israel in front of the temple preaching, and people are going to try to kill them, and for that 3.5 years they can't kill them. We talked about that before too. Anybody that comes up and tries to kill them, they're going to open their mouth and flames going to come out and incinerate them for 3.5 years. That's pretty powerful stuff. Sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. This can sound pretty fanciful until you realize, again, that everything in this book that was prophesied has either already come about or it's in the process of coming about. We're talking about a temple, guys, that they've already built the stuff for. We're talking about a temple that sits on a mount where the Muslims have their dome of the rock that's falling down. It's cracking. It's going to fall. We got people in Israel now that are bringing up in the past week in the rabbinical and academic community, they have brought up the fact that they're going to start discussing. They are willing to start discussing Jesus again and who he was, what he was. Of course, we also have who he is and what he is. And just with the rabbis opening up this discussion to see if they need to include him again in the Hebrew history, because they basically, to use a term that we would all understand, they excommunicated him when he said he was the Son of God. He basically was just taken out of Hebrew history and plopped over here on the side and said, we don't want to talk about him anymore. Now here we are 2,000 years later, and they're actually talking about opening up discussions about Jesus again in Israel. Now, if only 1% of those people over there accept him, hardline Orthodox Jews start accepting Yeshua, the end is near. It is upon us. Now, we know here in America and even worldwide, there's a lot of Messianic Jews that have come to know Jesus in the past several years. We know that. So we know that it's happening here. But when you get into Israel, it's not a lot of that at all. There's just not. Jews for Jesus has been going over there for 40 years now. And they've not made a whole lot of headway. You know, they'll use him for tourism. They love it when Christians come over there and visit the holy sites, and they'll take our money. But they've never really been open to the discussion of who Jesus was. Could he be the Messiah? Could they have missed it? And I think some of them are going to see that. And then here at the end, God's going to hammer it home with 2 witnesses in front of the rebuilt temple, proclaiming, hey, I'm Elijah. Remember me? You held me in esteem right here. I'm pointing to Jesus. Hey, I'm Enoch. You've got me in your Tanakh. I'm in your holy scripture. Guess who I'm pointing to? Jesus. So these guys are going to have powerful words, not just powerful against all the enemies, but powerful words. Satan and the Antichrist are going to hate them. The New World Order is going to hate them. They can't do nothing about it. So the temple's rebuilding is upon us. This is huge. I mean, this whole thing that I just discussed, this is huge for them to even think about opening up a discussion of who Yeshua is and was over there. The time is near. That's all I can say. That's all. I never thought that I would really actually get to see that. The point here is that we've seen prophecies fulfilled to the point where we believe the Bible's true. Because we've seen these prophecies fulfilled. We can go back to all the Messianic prophecies, and we know they're true. We can go back to every prophecy that's been foretold up to this point and know that it's true. Israel became a nation in 1948. For 1900 and something years, that was not even a possibility. The Jews had been scattered everywhere. There was still a little remnant over there. But then boom, overnight, Israel's a state. That's a huge prophecy that had to happen before the end. And it's happened. So like Eric said a while ago, we got to get our zeal, we got to get our zealousness for Yeshua up. We don't have much longer. That's why we call this an end time series. We didn't say this was a let's get ready to talk about it time series. This is an end time series. You know, we're sitting here going, well, praise Jesus. That doesn't turn the world on. The gospel needs to be going. Let them decide. We're not responsible for it. Lay it out there. Do it in the Spirit of God. And then let Him do the work. We're not responsible for it. You know, if you get mocked, if you get hurt, that's no big deal. That's what we're supposed to be doing. There's martyrs in heaven that did that very thing. Who would trade places with us in a heartbeat to get to see the second coming, to get to see this stuff in person, to get to see the temple rebuilt in person. They'd trade places with us in a heartbeat. So let's get out and do it. And even so, Adonai Yeshua, come quickly.